First story, Black Hollow Psychiatric Center. The night shift at Black Hollow Psychiatric Center carried a peculiar weight, a suffocating pressure that seemed to settle on your lungs, forcing each breath to become deliberate. I had worked there for just over 3 months, long enough to learn the building's odd rhythms. The way the fluorescent lights buzzed in slightly different tones along each hallway, how the ancient heating system made sounds like distant groaning, and the inexplicable shift in air pressure that happened precisely at 3:33 a.m. That was when I first noticed her. Room 217 housed Eleanor Granger, a former linguistics professor institutionalized 2 weeks earlier after what the intake notes vaguely called acute dissociative fugue with auditory distortions. She rarely spoke during the day, just sat by the window tracing invisible letters in the air or whispering words from long-dead languages no one could place. Dr. Halverson called it textbook behavior, the kind he'd seen countless times before, but there was nothing textbook about what happened when the clock struck 3:33. On my third night making rounds, I heard it for the first time, a sound like fabric tearing underwater, seeping from Eleanor's room. Peering through the reinforced glass, I watched her pupils dilate until they consumed the entire iris. Her eyes turned into 2 ink-black voids, yet somehow reflected an amber gleam, like molten gold glimpsed through pitch. The sight was mesmerizing and deeply wrong, not medically wrong, existentially wrong. She remained motionless during these episodes, her breath so shallow it barely stirred her chest. Exactly 7 minutes later, the dilation vanished. She blinked twice and returned to her usual dazed self, unaware of anything out of the ordinary. When I brought it up with Dr. Halverson, he gave a perfunctory nod and muttered something about neurological triggers. The brain responds to internal trauma in strange ways, he said without looking up from his clipboard. But I knew it wasn't a symptom. The next night, I was ready. I waited outside Eleanor's room with a notepad in hand at exactly 3:30 a.m. Something about the air felt thicker. The fluorescent light outside her door flickered, not randomly but in a rhythm. 3 quick flashes, 3 slow, 3 quick again. SOS. A chill passed down the corridor, my breath turning visible in the sudden drop in temperature. At 3:33 a.m. sharp, her transformation began. Her pupils dilated again, but this time they seemed deep, not just dark, but infinite. The amber reflection within danced like firelight from another world. Her breathing stopped completely, then resumed in a slow, mechanical rhythm. The intercom system crackled, static at first, then Morse code. I recognized the pattern instantly from my college ham radio days, VAL. It repeated 3 times and faded. Eleanor's eyes returned to normal. I told myself it was coincidence. A glitchy intercom, a flickering bulb. But deep down, I knew. Something had looked out through those eyes and it had seen me. By the 3rd night, I formed a theory. Eleanor's fugue states weren't random. They were anchored time connections to something else. Perhaps 3:33 a.m. wasn't just a time. It was a memory, a point of contact. Val might have been a name, a location, a call sign. This time, I brought my phone and a digital recorder. If I was going to be dismissed again, I wanted proof. As I waited, the air grew heavy, almost gelatinous. Then her head turned abruptly as if guided by invisible strings, and her pitch-black eyes locked with mine. The amber light flared like a flare behind glass. I froze. Something was inside her, watching through her. My devices shorted out. First, the recorder shrieked and died. Then my phone screen went to static. The intercom buzzed. VAL, VAL, VAL. Then, in a voice not quite hers, the system hissed, "Thank you for noticing, thank you for reaching, thank you for allowing." I staggered away from the door, breaking eye contact, and immediately everything normalized. Light. Temperature. Eleanor blinked, confused. But something had shifted. I felt it in my chest, inside my head. That morning, I couldn't look anyone in the eye, and I avoided mirrors, afraid of what might look back, but something even stranger began to happen. I knew things I shouldn't. I knew that Eleanor had been stationed at a research facility in Reykjavik in the 80s. I knew about her experiments with phonetic resonance and forgotten frequencies. I knew that she'd been exposed to an anomalous burst of sound just past 3:30 a.m. one night, a signal that should never have existed in human hearing range. Something had answered her transmission. By the fourth night, I accepted the truth. If I was going mad, I'd do it on my own terms. I brought protective tokens, salt, iron, my grandmother's old crucifix. I repeated mantras, constructed mental defenses. And when 3:33 came, I did not look away. Eleanor's eyes became wells of lightless space, ringed with that terrible amber glow. The presence pressed against my mind again, but this time I pushed back, not with resistance, but with understanding. What I felt wasn't malevolent. It was lost, trapped. It had clung to Eleanor through that one forgotten frequency, like a castaway clinging to a radio tower. Through the link I saw that night, Eleanor alone, headphones on, whispering into the void. Can anyone hear me? Something had. Every night at 3:33 a.m., it tried to return, and now it had found me. Over the following weeks, I studied everything I could: resonance theory, EM wave behavior, ancient phoneme structures. I built an interface, a digital translator. The goal was simple: shift its point of contact away from Eleanor, give it a clearer path, a signal, not a soul. The test began on a foggy night in November. When Eleanor's transformation began, I activated the array. Signals poured in, patterns too complex to be static. The translator began parsing them. It was language. The being had been caught between dimensions during Eleanor's experiment. It didn't belong here, but it couldn't return without a precise harmonic resonance at a precise point in time. 3:33 a.m., the time of the original contact. Night after night, I refined the frequencies. The more successful I became, the more Eleanor recovered. Her fugue episode shortened. Her eyes stopped dilating. She began speaking in full sentences again. Her mind, after decades of fracture, was mending. But I wasn't so lucky. The entity had shifted its focus from Eleanor to me. I woke each morning with traces of amber in my eyes. I heard voices and static. I began dreaming in frequencies. The lines blurred. Was I helping or becoming? December 12th, I completed the final harmonic array. The last transmission was scheduled for December 15th at 3:33 a.m. I broadcast the calculated signal and felt the being surge into me. For 7 minutes, I was it, floating in black space, feeling its loneliness, its gratitude. Then it was gone. Eleanor awoke whole, clear-eyed. She smiled and asked for coffee. Dr. Halverson called it a miracle. I called it a trade, because now I hear others. Each night at 3:33 a.m., new signals come through. Lost voices, desperate calls. Other consciousnesses displaced in the dark places between worlds. I am their anchor now, their translator. And sometimes in the mirror, I see it, that amber reflection. Not a warning, a responsibility. As I write this 6 months later, I no longer wonder if I took Eleanor's place. I know I did, but she sleeps soundly now. That has to mean something. The frequency still calls, and the gate? The gate needs a keeper. Second story, Echo of the Desert. The high plains of the Nevada desert have a way of swallowing time. Mile after mile of cracked asphalt, scrub brush, and silence that presses against your ears until you begin to question whether sound ever existed at all. It was just after 3:00 a.m. when I found myself barreling east on Highway 50, the so-called loneliest road in America, heading toward Ely with an empty trailer and a belly full of bad coffee. The CB radio hissed with occasional static. 15 years on the road, and I had learned to respect the quiet stretches. But that night, something in the air felt wrong. Thick, heavy. The sky was moonless, the stars unusually dim. My headlights pierced only a few yards ahead, swallowed by a darkness that felt deliberate. The hum of the tires changed somewhere past Middlegate. Not louder, not softer, just off. like I wasn't driving on asphalt anymore, but something pretending to be. That's when I first noticed it, a pale shimmer in the side mirror, there and gone, like a mirage with a heartbeat. I adjusted the mirror, nothing, just the back end of my trailer and the endless road. But the air had shifted. The cab felt smaller, the walls inching inward when I wasn't looking. I gripped the wheel tighter and turned up the radio, static. Then a voice. "Southbound rig." "You got company." I grabbed the mic. "Come again?" Nothing. And then I saw it, clear this time, a shape, bone white and fast, galloping just beyond my taillights. Not quite a horse, not quite a deer. It glided inches above the pavement. Its eyes were luminous hollows like candlelight through bone. I hit the gas, the truck surged forward. The creature matched my speed, impossibly fluid. Some primal part of me knew it was real, and it was watching. "Anyone else out here seeing this?" I radioed. A crackle. "Eastbound freight, keep moving. Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop." The creature drew closer, hovering behind the trailer, studying me. I felt pressure on my chest like it was trying to reach through the mirror. I pushed the truck harder. 90, still it followed. It rose into the air and touched the trailer. Everything changed. The wheel fought back. The engine growled. A dry, whispering sound crawled up my spine. I floored it. We roared through the desert, the creature still there, bound to the truck like a shadow. 20 miles to Eureka, but the signs were bent. Time felt loose. Then it vanished. I coasted into a rest area, heart pounding. I should have checked the trailer, but I was afraid. Eventually, I got out. Cold air bit at me. On the bumper, I found a mark. Small, geometric. Not scratched in, grown into the metal. Inside the gas station, a woman looked up. Her name tag said, "Miriam." "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked. "Seen what?" "The white one. Desert doesn't like trespassers." I tried to laugh. "What is it?" "A guardian, an echo. It follows those who forget where they are." She poured coffee. "My grandfather saw it. He learned." "Learned what?" "To listen." She handed me a carved disc on a string. "Wear this. It reminds." Back on the road, things got stranger. Just outside Austin, I passed trucks idling. One driver flagged me. "Did you see them? White figures. Watching." That same night, a hawk with no eyes circled my rig. My reflection lagged behind my movements. Paiute stories spoke of desert guardians, judges of the sacred, the mark, a summons. Weeks later, I stopped sleeping. My dreams became hunts. I began hearing whispers on a dead radio. "Go back, bury what you took, restore the path." But I hadn't taken anything. Not physically, I had taken a memory. The white one had passed through me, left a door open. Now I drive, not to run, but to seek. Following dream coordinates, trails lined with antler-shaped cairns. I don't know if the guardian wants me to find something or become something, but I know this. Every night at 3 a.m., when the engine hum turns hollow, I check the mirror. Most nights now, I'm not alone. Good night.